Tim Kirby Russia, hot takes. Phase 2 of Russia's special operation in the Ukraine. What is it going to look like? Where's it going to go? You know, a lot of experts would say that probably the most logical step, which I do think will happen, is for Russia to seal the cauldron completely. You know, there's a lot of Ukraine's forces, which could be presumably already out of gasoline, somewhat trapped in the very east from a Kiev perspective, or the western part of the breakaway republics from a Russian perspective. If you look at all the maps that Russia produces, and even sometimes even the Western media, you can really see that that's where a lot of the fighting is and where the possibility for an encirclement is. That's kind of obvious. A lot of others would think that Russia's going to now, freed up, try to go back to Kiev or Kharkov. Well, Russia's kind of already in Kharkov, but try to get Kiev. This is probably not going to happen. What I think is going to happen, and what it would seem that the Russians have actually been starting to declare, is that they are going to sweep to the south and west, across the sea, towards Odessa. Why Odessa? Why is that particular place so important, despite the fact that it sort of violates the rules of strategic warfare and geopolitics to really create this long, thin area that sticks out to the west? The reason is because of Moldova. Moldova could very much so become the second front in a war against Russia. For those who don't know, there are two regions of Russia. One is also known as Pridnestrovye, Transnistria, which is a breakaway republic strip to the very east. Okay, that's a lot more favorable to Russia than it is to the west. There's also the area which has a very interesting geography known as Gagauzia. And the Gagauzians are not particularly thrilled with any sort of concept of Romanian Moldovan nationalism because, as we've mentioned before in many of these videos, basically in every former Soviet republic, it was the State Department's job to sort of fill, and the local government's job, to fill the ideological vacuum with some sort of corny, primitive nationalism. A strange nationalism that was completely anti-Russian, blamed Russia for everything, yet made sure that every child got to watch Disney growing up and learn English in school. Now, the people in Gagauzia and in Transnistria especially are probably very scared that NATO is going to try to get them first before the Russians can get to them. And how can they do that? Via extremely EU-loyal President Maya Sandu. Now, whether you believe that the elections that got Sandu in office were super legitimate, medium legitimate, or low legitimate, the fact is, despite the fact that she's a lot more sober than President Zelensky, she is as equally willing to do whatever they tell her. So the situation does look a little bit scary, but there is one sort of ray of hope and one big difference between Moldova and Ukraine. Again, as we've talked about before on this channel, one of the reasons that Ukraine is sort of different from the other former Soviet republics is because they had this sort of kernel of history about this Bandera guy, and they built this hateful Nazi ideology really around this one Bandera guy. And despite the fact that, like, the territory of Romania was loyal to Hitler, there isn't really that core thing to build this sort of neo-Nazi movement around, and that's probably why it hasn't happened there. And also, if you ever go to Moldova, it's pretty chill. So the one good thing is that, fortunately, the propaganda that created the nightmare situation in Ukraine hasn't really been able to do so in Moldova. And I can imagine that trying to mobilize and activate some sort of ethnic cleansing operation in Moldova would go just about as well as it did in Georgia in 2008. So anyways, guys, the real push is going to be towards Odessa, an extremely loyal to Russia city that borders on the critical Transnistria, which could become this incredible hot point and a sort of second front in the war, or at least it could become, if Russia doesn't get access to a border to it, the next horrific repressions of Russian-speaking people will happen there that you can count on.